I'll give you my Mercedes if you make it run. Billionaire humiliates his black maid not knowing. Subscribe to the Maid's Secret for more stories. Don't risk missing the next story. Follow, comment, and share. Let's begin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling Armand estate, a 20-acre monument to wealth nestled in the exclusive hills of Greenwich, Connecticut. The marble driveway gleamed like polished ivory, its pristine surface reflecting the cloudless May sky and the man who believed he owned not just the property, but the very air above it. Victor Armand stood at the top of the grand entrance stairs, his silhouette cutting a sharp figure against the limestone facade of the mansion. At 42, he possessed the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. His tailored charcoal suit hung perfectly on his athletic frame, his Italian leather shoes spotless despite the garden party preparations happening all around him. "Richardson," Victor's voice carried across the lawn, causing the estate manager to flinch visibly. "Why are the caterers setting up by the East Garden?" "I specifically said the Western Terrace for the Foundation Gala." His words weren't shouted, but they didn't need to be. When Victor Armand spoke, people scrambled. "Right away, Mr. Armand," Richardson responded, already gesturing frantically to redirect the white uniformed staff who had begun arranging tables in the wrong location. Victor checked his watch. A limited edition Patek Philippe that cost more than what most of his staff earned in 5 years. The annual Armand Foundation Charity Gala would begin in 6 hours, bringing together the East Coast elite, senators, CEOs, celebrities, and old money families who would write substantial checks to benefit underprivileged children while sipping $400 champagne. The irony was not lost on Elise Johnson as she watched from the service entrance. At 32, she had spent the last 3 years as the head housekeeper at the Armand estate, overseeing the cleaning staff while personally attending to Victor's private quarters. She adjusted her simple black uniform and tucked a loose strand of hair back into her neat bun before returning to her morning duties. "Morning, Elise," called Marcus, the groundskeeper, as he wheeled a cart of fresh-cut flowers toward the mansion. "Another day in paradise, huh?" Elise offered a tired smile. "For someone, I suppose." Her voice was soft, but carried an underlying strength that those who knew her recognized immediately. Inside the mansion's east wing, Elise methodically worked through her morning routine. The marble floors gleamed under her careful attention, each piece of antique furniture dusted with precision. As she moved through the massive library, her fingers occasionally traced the spines of books she would never have time to read. Engineering textbooks, automotive design manuals, remnants of a different life, a different path. "Elise!" The sharp voice of Mrs. Crawford, the house manager, interrupted her thoughts. "Mr. Armand wants his new suit pressed immediately for tonight, and he's planning to showcase the new Mercedes to his guests, so make sure the garage entrance is spotless." "Yes, Mrs. Crawford." Elise nodded, setting aside her cleaning supplies. As she headed toward the laundry room, she passed the enormous portrait of Malcolm Armand, Victor's father, hanging in the main hall. The elder Armand's eyes seemed to follow her, cold and calculating even in oil paint. She quickened her pace. Outside, Victor was inspecting his latest acquisition, a custom Mercedes AMG GT Black Series, its obsidian paint job gleaming under the morning light. The car had cost him nearly $500,000, modified to his exact specifications with carbon fiber detailing and a hand-stitched interior. It was to be the centerpiece of today's event, a symbol of the Armand family's continued success and Victor's personal achievement. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Victor murmured to James Whitaker, his CFO and oldest friend, who had arrived early to review some documents before the gala. "Extraordinary," James agreed, circling the vehicle with appropriate reverence. "The engineering alone is a marvel." Victor ran his hand along the sleek hood. "German precision. Japanese efficiency might be impressive, but nothing beats German engineering for pure performance." "Planning to take some of the donors for a spin later?" James asked, adjusting his glasses. "Of course. Senator Hopkins practically begged for a ride when I mentioned it last week." Victor smirked, pulling the key fob from his pocket. "Let me show you what she sounds like." With a dramatic flourish, Victor pressed the start button, anticipating the powerful roar of the engine. But instead of the expected growl, there was only a clicking sound followed by silence. Victor frowned, pressing the button again. "Nothing. That's odd," James said carefully, knowing Victor's temperament when things didn't go as planned. "It was fine yesterday," Victor muttered, his jaw tightening as he tried again. The same dead response. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel. "This is unacceptable. I'm supposed to showcase this tonight." By now, several staff members had paused their work, watching the scene unfold with cautious eyes. Victor noticed the attention, and his embarrassment quickly transformed into anger. "Richardson!" he called out. "Get my mechanic on the phone immediately." "Sir, it's Saturday. Your regular service center is closed until Monday," Richardson responded nervously. "Then find someone else," Victor snapped, stepping out of the car. His face had reddened slightly, his composure cracking. "This car cost more than you'll make in a decade. I want it fixed now." Inside the house, Elise had just finished pressing Victor's suit when she heard the commotion outside. Through the window, she could see Victor gesturing angrily at the beautiful black car. Something was wrong. She carefully hung the suit and made her way downstairs, curious despite herself. By the time she reached the driveway, a small crowd had gathered. Groundskeepers, kitchen staff, and several early arriving assistants setting up for the gala. Victor was on the phone, his voice rising with each passing second. "I don't care what your weekend rates are. This is Victor Armand. I expect someone here within the hour." He ended the call with a vicious jab at his phone screen. James attempted to calm him. "Victor, it's probably something simple. We can have someone look at it after the gala." "The car is part of tonight's presentation," Victor insisted, pacing around the vehicle. "How am I supposed to announce the new transportation initiative for underprivileged youth while my own car won't even start?" Elise stood at the edge of the gathered crowd, observing silently. She noticed the way Victor's hand had trembled slightly when he'd tried the key again. Not from nervousness, but from rage barely contained. She had seen that look before during her first year at the estate when he'd fired a gardener on the spot for planting the wrong variety of roses. "Perhaps we could call for a replacement vehicle," Richardson suggested. "The dealership might—" "I don't want a replacement," Victor cut him off. "I want this car working as it should be." His eyes scanned the gathered staff, seeking an outlet for his frustration. His gaze fell on Elise, standing slightly apart from the others, and a cold smile spread across his face. "Johnson," he called out, using her surname as he always did with the household staff. "You seem interested in our little mechanical drama." Elise straightened her posture. "I was just delivering your pressed suit, Mr. Armand." Victor walked toward her, the key fob dangling from his fingers. The other staff members unconsciously stepped back, creating a circle around them. James watched with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, recognizing the dangerous glint in his friend's eye. "Tell me, Johnson," Victor said, his voice carrying across the now silent driveway. "What would you do with a car like this?" Elise remained still, recognizing the trap. "I wouldn't presume to know, sir." "No, really." Victor's smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. "If you had a $500,000 car, what would you do? Take your friends for a ride? Show off in your neighborhood?" The condescension in his voice was thick, drawing uncomfortable glances from the staff. "I'd maintain it properly, sir," Elise replied evenly, her eyes meeting his without flinching. A ripple of nervous laughter came from some of the gathered staff, quickly silenced by Victor's sharp glance. But rather than anger him, Elise's response seemed to amuse him further. "Maintain it?" he echoed, turning to include his audience. "Well, that's rich coming from someone who cleans toilets for a living." The silence that followed was deafening. Elise felt heat rising to her cheeks, but her expression remained composed, a skill she had perfected over years of similar humiliations. Victor tossed the key fob suddenly in her direction. Surprised, Elise caught it reflexively, her movement graceful despite the unexpectedness of it. "I'll make you a deal, Johnson," Victor announced, his voice performatively generous like a king bestowing a favor. "If you can make it run, the car's yours." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Shocked murmurs, uncomfortable shifting, and a few nervous laughs. James stepped forward, placing a hand on Victor's shoulder. "Victor, come on," he muttered. "The mechanic will be here soon." But Victor shrugged him off, his eyes still fixed on Elise. "No, I'm serious. If my maid can fix what German engineers built, she deserves the car." His emphasis on maid was deliberate, pointed. Elise looked down at the key in her hand, then back at Victor. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not hurt, but something deeper. Knowledge, recognition, the weight of a history that stretched far beyond this marble driveway. "Well?" Victor prompted, clearly expecting her to back down, to hand back the key and retreat to the safety of the mansion's service areas. Instead, Elise closed her fingers around the key fob. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the car. Victor's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise before he recovered with a laugh. "By all means," he said, stepping aside with an exaggerated bow. "The stage is yours, Johnson." As Elise approached the gleaming black Mercedes, the whispers intensified. She could feel the weight of every gaze, the pity from her fellow staff members, the amusement from Victor and his associates, the curiosity from those who didn't know what to expect. Her hands were trembling slightly, but not from fear. Memories flooded back, the feel of tools in her hands, the smell of engine oil, the satisfaction of solving complex mechanical problems. A life interrupted, a dream deferred. She opened the driver's side door and sat down, familiarizing herself with the sophisticated cockpit. Then, methodically, she released the hood latch and stepped out to raise it. Under the hood, the complexity of the engine would have intimidated most, but Elise's eyes scanned it with practiced precision. Her fingers, the same ones that had polished Victor's silver and pressed his linens, now moved with surprising confidence across the engine components. "What exactly does she think she's doing?" Someone whispered loudly enough for all to hear. Victor crossed his arms, watching with undisguised amusement. "Providing us with the entertainment portion of our day, apparently." But as the minutes passed, his smile began to fade. Elise worked systematically, checking connections, inspecting components. Her movements became more assured with each passing moment, as though she were remembering a language once fluently spoken. And then, without warning, she closed the hood, returned to the driver's seat, and pressed the start button. The engine roared to life, its powerful growl echoing across the marble driveway. Silence fell over the crowd. Victor's smile disappeared completely. Elise stepped out of the car, the engine still purring behind her. She held out the key fob toward Victor, her expression unreadable. "It was just a loose connection to the starter relay," she said quietly. "Nothing serious." Victor stared at her, shock giving way to confusion, then something closer to anger. This wasn't how the scene was supposed to play out. He reached for the key but then hesitated, remembering his public declaration. "Well," he said finally, his voice strained, "it seems you got lucky." "Not luck, Mr. Armand," Elise replied, her voice still quiet but carrying a new undercurrent of confidence. "Knowledge." And in that moment, as their eyes met across the gleaming hood of the Mercedes, something shifted between them, a rebalancing of power, subtle but undeniable. Because in Elise's gaze was not just the triumph of the moment, but the weight of a revelation yet to come, that she was not just the woman who cleaned his home, but someone with a past connected to his own, in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. The first crack had appeared in Victor Armand's carefully constructed world, and neither of them would ever be the same. The Armand Foundation Gala proceeded that evening as planned, crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over the western terrace. Waiters in crisp white uniforms weaved through the crowd of Connecticut's elite, carrying trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, their music almost drowned by the murmur of influential conversations and strategic laughter. Victor Armand stood at the center of it all, seemingly recovered from the morning's embarrassment. His custom tuxedo fit impeccably, his smile practiced and charming, as he guided Senator Hopkins toward the gleaming Mercedes now parked prominently on the circular display pad at the terrace's edge. "German engineering at its finest," Victor was saying, his hand resting possessively on the car's roof. 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. "Impressive," the senator nodded appreciatively. "Though I heard there was some trouble with it earlier today?" Victor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "A minor issue. Nothing significant." From the service entrance, Elise watched the scene unfold as she directed the catering staff. Her uniform was identical to those worn by the other household employees. Black slacks, white button-up shirt, black vest, designed to render them practically invisible to the guests. Yet she felt Victor's gaze occasionally flicker toward her, a new wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Ms. Johnson?" Mrs. Crawford appeared at her side. "Mr. Richardson needs extra hands for the gift bags in the East Wing." Elise nodded, grateful for the excuse to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the gala. As she made her way through the mansion's grand corridors, her mind returned to the morning's events. The feel of the Mercedes's engine components beneath her fingers had awakened something she'd tried to bury for years, a sense of competence and purpose that extended beyond cleaning someone else's home. In the East Wing library, Richardson was overseeing the assembly of elaborate gift bags for the departing guests. Each contained a small crystal paperweight engraved with the Armand Foundation logo, artisanal chocolates, and a brochure detailing the foundation's work with underprivileged youth. "Ah, Johnson," Richardson said, relief evident in his voice. "We're behind schedule. Can you finish these last 20 bags?" "Of course." Elise took her position at the table, efficiently assembling the luxury items into black gift bags tied with silver ribbon. As she worked, her attention was drawn to a framed photograph on the library wall, a younger Malcolm Armand standing beside a factory floor, his arm around the shoulder of a smiling black man in engineering coveralls. The sight of it sent a jolt through her body, nearly causing her to drop the crystal paperweight in her hands. She steadied herself, focusing on her breathing as she had taught herself to do whenever the past threatened to overwhelm her present. "Are you all right?" asked Daphne, one of the younger housekeepers who was helping with the bags. "Fine," Elise replied automatically. "Just tired." "I don't blame you, especially after this morning." Daphne lowered her voice. "Everyone's talking about what happened with the car. Where did you learn to do that?" Elise tied a silver ribbon with practiced precision. "My father taught me," she said simply, offering no further explanation. Before Daphne could press further, James Whitaker entered the library, his bow tie slightly askew after several hours of socializing. He paused when he saw Elise, studying her with open curiosity. "Ms. Johnson," he said, approaching the table, "I wanted to compliment you on your mechanical skills this morning. Quite impressive." Elise nodded politely. "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I understand Victor promised you the car if you could start it," he continued, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I assume that offer was rescinded?" "It was never a serious offer, sir," Elise replied evenly, though her fingers tightened slightly around the ribbon she was tying. James seemed about to say something more when Richardson intervened. "Mr. Whitaker, can I help you with something specific?" "Just needed a moment away from the crowd," James said, straightening his bow tie. "And I was curious about our resident mechanical genius." His tone was light, but his gaze on Elise was assessing, calculating. "If you'll excuse me," Elise said, finishing the last gift bag, "I should get back to the main floor." As she left the library, she could feel James watching her, and the weight of that photograph on the wall seemed to press against her back. Back at the gala, Victor was mid-speech, standing on a small platform with the Mercedes gleaming behind him. "The Armand Foundation's new transportation initiative will provide reliable vehicles to community centers in underserved neighborhoods," he was saying, his voice carrying across the rapt crowd. "Because we believe that mobility is the first step toward opportunity." The irony wasn't lost on Elise as she resumed her station near the service entrance. She watched Victor gesture expansively, the same hands that had mockingly tossed her the car keys now positioning himself as a champion for the underprivileged. The guests applauded enthusiastically, champagne glasses raised in approval. "He's good, isn't he?" murmured Marcus, who was helping monitor the service entrance. "Almost makes you believe he cares." Elise didn't respond, her attention caught by something else. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair standing at the edge of the crowd, studying Victor with an unreadable expression. Lawrence Bennett, the former chief engineer at Armand Industries before Malcolm sold the company and transitioned to pure finance, her father's old boss. Bennett's presence was unexpected, the connection to her past too coincidental on this of all days. She turned away quickly, busying herself with rearranging clean glasses on a tray. "Johnson," Mrs. Crawford's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "Mr. Armand wants fresh towels taken to the guest bathrooms immediately." "Yes, Mrs. Crawford." Elise welcomed the task, needing distance from the party and the memories it was stirring. In the linen closet, as she gathered the plush monogrammed towels, Elise allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes briefly as the weight of the day of years pressed down on her. When she opened them again, she was startled to find Victor standing in the doorway watching her. "Mr. Armand," she said, immediately straightening. "I was just getting fresh towels for the—" "How did you know how to fix the car?" he interrupted, his voice low and controlled. The sounds of the party were distant here, the narrow service corridor offering privacy. Elise met his gaze steadily. "As I said, it was just a loose connection. That's not what I asked." Victor stepped closer, the width of the corridor suddenly seeming much narrower. "You handled that engine like someone with training, like a mechanic." His eyes narrowed. "Not like a housekeeper." "People can be many things, Mr. Armand," Elise replied carefully, "more than what their current job suggests." Victor studied her, and for the first time since she'd worked in his home, he seemed to be truly seeing her. Not as a servant, not as part of the invisible machinery that kept his life running smoothly, but as an individual with a history unknown to him. "Lawrence Bennett asked about you," he said finally. "He seemed to think he recognized you, though he couldn't place from where." Elise's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I've worked at several estates in the area," Perhaps from one of those. Perhaps. Victor didn't sound convinced. Though Bennett rarely socializes in those circles, he took another step closer. You know, I review all employee applications personally. Yours mentioned nothing about mechanical training or engineering knowledge. It wasn't relevant to the position, Elise said, clutching the towels tighter against her chest like a shield. I disagree. Victor's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. I think transparency is essential in a household like mine. I need to know who works for me, really know them. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on Elise. A man demanding transparency from others while building walls around himself, constructing a persona of benevolence that masked a much colder reality. With respect, Mr. Armand, she said quietly, you hired me to clean your home, not share my life story. Something flashed in Victor's eyes, anger perhaps, or surprise at her directness. Before he could respond, James appeared at the end of the corridor. Victor, he called, an edge of urgency in his voice. Senator Hopkins is leaving and wants to say goodbye. Victor hesitated, clearly reluctant to end the conversation, but the social demands of his position won out. We'll continue this discussion later, Johnson, he said, his tone making it clear it wasn't optional. As he walked away, Elise released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The encounter had left her shaken, not because of Victor's intimidation tactics. She had weathered worse, but because the careful separation she had maintained between her past and present was beginning to crumble. Later that night, long after the guests had departed and the staff had cleaned up the evidence of extravagance, Elise sat alone in her small room in the staff quarters. Unlike the mansion's opulent spaces, her accommodations were Spartan. A single bed, a small dresser, a shared bathroom down the hall, but it offered privacy, a rare commodity in her life. From beneath her mattress, she withdrew a worn manila envelope. Inside were the few treasures she had preserved from her previous life. A faded photograph of her father in his engineering uniform, standing proudly in front of Armand Industries' main factory. Her own partial transcript from MIT showing a 4, so GPA before she'd been forced to withdraw, and a newspaper clipping with the headline Armand Industries sold, hundreds laid off. She spread these items on her bed, connecting dots that Victor Armand couldn't yet see. The empire he had inherited was built on the ruins of others' dreams, her father's included. A soft knock at her door startled her. She quickly gathered the items, returning them to their hiding place before opening the door, to find Daphne standing there, still in uniform despite the late hour. Sorry to disturb you, Daphne said, her expression troubled. But I thought you should know, mister. Armand was asking questions about you in the kitchen. About your background, your family. Elise's stomach tightened. What did people say? Not much. No one really knows anything, do they? You keep to yourself. Daphne hesitated. But Mrs. Crawford mentioned you came with excellent references from the Petersons in Westport, and that you never talk about your family. Thank you for telling me, Elise said, genuine gratitude in her voice. After Daphne left, Elise sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. Victor's interest in her past was dangerous, threatening to unravel the careful life she had constructed after everything fell apart. Yet there was also an opportunity here, one she had been patiently waiting for since the day she applied for the position at the Armand estate. Tomorrow was Sunday, her half-day off. She would use it wisely. Across the estate, in his private study, Victor sat nursing a glass of 30-year-old scotch. The gala had been a success by all metrics. Over $2 million raised, connections strengthened with key political figures, positive press coverage guaranteed. Yet he couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him since the morning's incident. You're overthinking this, James said from the leather chair opposite him. As Victor's oldest friend and most trusted advisor, he was the only guest who had stayed behind. So your maid knows something about cars. It's hardly a security threat. It's not about the car, Victor replied, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. It's about knowing who's in my house, who has access to my life. He took a sip, letting the scotch burn down his throat. Bennett's reaction was strange. He kept looking at her throughout the evening. Lawrence is getting old. James shrugged. His memory isn't what it used to be. Maybe. Victor set down his glass. Run a deeper background check on her, not just the standard employment screening. I want to know everything, where she's from, her education, family connections, any possible link to Bennett or my father. James raised an eyebrow. That's excessive, even for you. Just do it, Victor insisted. Something doesn't add up, and I don't like puzzles I can't solve. What Victor couldn't articulate even to James was the feeling that had gripped him when he saw Elise start the car, a peculiar mixture of humiliation, anger, and something else. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a formidable mind hidden behind the subservient demeanor he had taken for granted. As he stared into the dying embers of the fire, Victor Armand couldn't have known that Elise Johnson was doing the same in her small room, both of them contemplating a collision course that had been set in motion long before either realized. A reckoning years in the making that would force them both to confront truths about themselves and each other. That would change everything. The marble driveway that separated their worlds was just the beginning. Sunday morning dawned with a gentle mist hanging over the Armand estate, softening the harsh lines of wealth and privilege. Most of the staff had their weekly day off, leaving only a skeleton crew to maintain the essential functions of the mansion. The silence that permeated the usually bustling household felt almost reverential, like a cathedral between services. Elise woke early, her half-day off too precious to waste on sleep. She dressed carefully in clothes rarely seen by her employers: dark jeans, a simple blue blouse, and a lightweight jacket that concealed the professional woman she might have become under different circumstances. Her natural hair, usually confined to a practical bun while working, hung in defined curls that framed her face, transforming her appearance from servant to stranger. She moved quietly through the service corridors, a shadow familiar with every creaking floorboard, and which doors opened silently. The household was still recovering from the previous night's gala, and she encountered no one on her way out except Marcus, who was adjusting the sprinkler system on the east lawn. "Heading out," he called as she crossed the service driveway toward the staff parking area. "Just for the morning," she replied with a small wave. "Back by 2. Her car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic with meticulous maintenance but visible wear, was a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles that typically occupied the Armand estate. As she turned the key, she couldn't help but think of yesterday's Mercedes, its powerful engine purring to life under her touch. For a fleeting moment, she had reconnected with a version of herself long buried, the promising engineering student, her father's daughter, a woman with ambitions beyond service. 30 minutes later, Elise parked outside a modest colonial-style house in Stamford's East Side. The neighborhood was solidly middle class, with neat lawns and well-maintained homes speaking to the dignity of those who worked hard for what they had. She sat in her car for a moment, gathering her courage, then approached the front door and knocked. Lawrence Bennett answered, his silver hair uncombed and wearing reading glasses that he removed upon recognizing her. His momentary confusion gave way to understanding, then quiet amazement. "Elizabeth Johnson," he said, her full name sounding strange after years of being called simply Johnson or Elise. "I knew I recognized you yesterday but couldn't place why. You look so much like your father." "Hello, Mr. Bennett," she replied. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced." "Nonsense." He opened the door wider. "Please come in, and call me Lawrence, please. It's been far too long." Inside, the house was comfortable but modest, filled with books and mementos from a long career in engineering. Photos on the wall showed Lawrence at various stages of his career, including several with Malcolm Armand at the factory and company events. Elise's eyes lingered on one that included her father, standing proudly among the senior engineering team. "Coffee?" Lawrence offered, leading her to a sunlit kitchen at the back of the house. "Please." She sat at the kitchen table while he busied himself with the coffee maker, his movements betraying the slight stiffness of advancing age. "I must say," he began as he set 2 mugs on the table, "finding you working as household staff for Victor Armand was quite a shock. Last I heard you were at MIT on a full scholarship." Elise wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Life took an unexpected turn after my father died." Lawrence's face softened with genuine sorrow. James was a brilliant engineer. His death was a tremendous loss. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I never understood why you didn't reach out afterward. The company's educational foundation could have continued supporting your studies. The company that existed when my father was alive was gone by then," Elise replied, a hint of bitterness seeping into her voice. "After Malcolm sold everything to that investment group and the mass layoffs began, the foundation was one of the first things dismantled." Understanding dawned on Lawrence's face, and by the time Victor re-established the Armand Foundation years later, "It was too late for me," she finished. "I'd already had to drop out, find work, care for my mother through her illness." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of missed opportunities and diverted dreams hanging between them. Outside, the sun broke through the morning mist, casting dappled light across the kitchen table. "I saw you at the gala yesterday," Elise finally said. "I didn't expect you to be there." Lawrence gave a small, ironic smile. Victor maintains certain traditions his father established. The annual invitation to the former chief engineer is mostly ceremonial now, but I go to honor the company that once was. He studied her over his coffee mug. "What I don't understand is why you're working there, of all places. Surely with your talents, it wasn't accidental," Elise interrupted, her voice low but firm. "I've been working toward a position at the Armand estate for 3 years. Lawrence's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You sought out the job? Why?" Instead of answering directly, Elise reached into her purse and withdrew a folded document. She placed it on the table between them, smoothing its creased surface with careful fingers. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. Lawrence put his reading glasses back on and leaned forward. His expression changed as he scanned the document, eyes widening in recognition. "This is Malcolm Armand's original patent application for the hybrid energy transfer system," he said, looking up at her in confusion. "How do you have this?" "It's not Malcolm's patent," Elise said quietly. "It's my father's work, his research, his designs, his innovation." Lawrence sat back, his face troubled. "Elizabeth, I don't understand. Your father was lead engineer on that project, certainly, but Malcolm was a businessman who recognized value when he saw it," she finished for him. "My father kept copies of all his original work at home. Notebooks, schematics, dated prototypes." Her voice remained steady despite the emotion behind her words. "After the buyout, after the layoffs, my father went to Malcolm with proof that the patent had been filed under the wrong name. He asked for recognition, not even compensation." "I never heard about this," Lawrence said, genuine confusion in his voice. "Because Malcolm buried it," Elise replied. "He threatened legal action if my father pursued it, leveraged his connections to ensure no other company would hire him." Her hands tightened around her mug. "Within 6 months, my father was unemployable in his field. Within a year, he was dead from a heart attack, leaving my mother and me with nothing but medical bills and a house in foreclosure." Lawrence's face had gone pale. "I had no idea," he whispered. "James never said anything to me." "He was a proud man," Elise said. "And by then you were gone too, retired after the company changed hands." Lawrence looked again at the patent document, his engineering mind assessing the details with professional precision. This could be complicated to prove after all these years, especially against someone with the Armand resources. "I know," Elise said, taking the document back and returning it to her purse. "That's not why I'm there." "Then why?" Lawrence asked, genuinely perplexed. Elise met his gaze directly. "Because Victor Armand knows nothing about what his father did. He inherited wealth built partially on stolen innovation, but he lives in ignorance of it." Her voice took on a quiet intensity. "I wanted to understand who he is, whether he's cut from the same cloth as Malcolm. And yesterday's incident with the car was unplanned," Elise admitted. "An impulse I shouldn't have indulged." Lawrence studied her carefully. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish, Elizabeth? Revenge?" She shook her head. "Justice, maybe. Recognition of my father's work at minimum." She looked out the window toward the neat suburban street, so different from the Armand estate's isolated grandeur. "I don't know exactly, but after 3 years of invisible service, yesterday was the first time Victor Armand actually saw me. Really saw me." "Be careful," Lawrence warned. "The Armands protect their legacy fiercely. Malcolm was ruthless in business, and Victor, for all his philanthropic posturing, didn't build his own fortune by being kind." "I know the risks," Elise said, finishing her coffee. "But I also know what's right." As she prepared to leave, Lawrence walked her to the door, his expression troubled. "Your father was a good man, Elizabeth. Brilliant and principled. He would be proud of what you've accomplished despite everything." He hesitated. "But he wouldn't want you to destroy yourself seeking justice against people who can afford to bury the truth indefinitely." Elise embraced him briefly. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Bennett." "Lawrence," he corrected gently. "And my door is always open to you." Back in her car, Elise checked the time. 11:30, still several hours before she needed to return to the estate. Her next destination was less pleasant but equally necessary. She drove to an upscale office complex in downtown Stamford, parking in a visitor's space outside a gleaming glass building that housed several law firms. Inside, she approached the reception desk with confidence that came from preparation rather than comfort. "I have an appointment with Caroline Martinez," she said. "Elizabeth Johnson, 10 minutes later, she sat across from a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, whose crisp suit and direct manner spoke of someone who didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Ms. Johnson," Caroline said, reviewing the notes on her tablet, "you said this was regarding a potential intellectual property case against Armand Industries. More specifically, the Armand family," Elise clarified. From her purse, she produced a USB drive. "This contains scans of my father's original research notebooks, dated prototypes, and correspondence that proves he was the true inventor of the hybrid energy transfer system, patented by Malcolm Armand in 2004. Caroline accepted the drive with professional neutrality. "And you're only bringing this forward now because my father died shortly after attempting to address it directly with Malcolm Armand," Elise explained. "My mother became ill, and I became the primary caregiver until her death 3 years ago. Financial survival took priority." The lawyer nodded, making notes. "You understand that cases like this are extremely difficult to prove, especially against someone with the resources of the Armand family. The statute of limitations could also be an issue." "I'm aware of the challenges," Elise said, "but I'm not necessarily looking for a lawsuit." Caroline looked up, intrigued. "What are you looking for then?" "Leverage," Elise replied simply, "and preparation should I need it." As she left the law office, the weight of the morning's conversations pressed on her. For years she had moved carefully, methodically, like a chess player positioning pieces for a game whose final move remained unclear even to her. Now, after yesterday's unexpected confrontation, the game was accelerating toward an endgame she couldn't fully predict. When Elise returned to the Armand estate shortly before 2 p.m., she found an unusual vehicle parked in the circular driveway, a police cruiser. Her heart rate quickened as she parked in the staff area and made her way toward the service entrance where Daphne was waiting with visible anxiety. "What's happening?" Elise asked quietly. "Someone broke into Mr. Armand's study last night," Daphne whispered. "They accessed his private files." "Mrs. Crawford called the police this morning when she noticed the lock had been tampered with." Before Elise could respond, Richardson appeared in the doorway, his usual composure noticeably strained. "Johnson," he said, "Mr. Armand wants to see you in the main library immediately." Elise nodded, maintaining a calm exterior despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. She hadn't broken into anything. Her plan was more nuanced than direct theft or vandalism, but the timing couldn't have been worse. In the library, Victor stood with a police officer and James examining what appeared to be security camera footage on a laptop. All three men looked up when she entered. "Ms. Johnson," Victor said, his tone unnervingly pleasant. "Thank you for joining us. Officer Ramirez has some questions about your whereabouts last night." Elise met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "I was in my room after finishing the post-gala cleanup, Mr. Armand, from approximately midnight until I left for my half-day this morning." "Can anyone verify that?" Officer Ramirez asked, his tone professional rather than accusatory. "The staff quarters have their own entry system," Elise replied. "I believe it logs entries and exits." James nodded, checking something on his phone. "It does. I can pull those records for you, officer." "That won't be necessary yet," Victor interrupted, his eyes never leaving Elise. "Ms. Johnson, my security system recorded someone entering my study at 2:17 a.m. The image quality isn't clear enough for facial recognition, but the build and height are similar to yours." "It wasn't me," Elise said simply. Victor studied her for a long moment before turning to the officer. "I'm sure we can resolve this internally, Officer Ramirez. If we discover anything requiring police attention, we'll contact you immediately." After the officer left, James excused himself as well, leaving Elise alone with Victor in the vast library. The space, with its leather-bound volumes and antique globes, had always symbolized to her the inequities of their respective positions. Knowledge and power concentrated in hands that often wielded both carelessly. "Where were you this morning?" Victor asked without preamble. "It's my half-day off," Elise replied. "I don't believe my personal time is subject to your scrutiny, Mr. Armand." Victor's eyebrows rose slightly at her directness. "It is when my private study has been broken into and files pertaining to my father's business dealings have been accessed. And you suspect me because yesterday you demonstrated knowledge and skills inconsistent with your employment application," Victor said, circling the large oak table that dominated the center of the library. "Because Lawrence Bennett recognized you at the gala. Because after 3 years of exemplary service, you suddenly reveal yourself to be something other than what you've presented." Elise remained silent, weighing her response carefully. "So I'll ask again," Victor continued, stopping directly across from her. "Where were you this morning?" Visiting an old family friend, she finally answered, and consulting a lawyer about a personal matter. Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her honesty. What personal matter requires legal consultation? That remains personal, Mr. Armand. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm not accustomed to employees who withhold information I request. Perhaps that's the problem, Elise replied quietly. You're accustomed to deference, not truth. The tension between them crackled like static electricity before a storm. Victor studied her with new intensity, as though trying to reconcile the deferential housekeeper of the past 3 years with the woman standing confidently before him now. Who are you really, Elizabeth Johnson? He asked, using her full name for the first time since she'd been employed there. Elise met his gaze unflinchingly. Someone who has waited a very long time for you to ask that question. The library's grand windows cast long afternoon shadows across the Persian rug as Victor and Elise faced each other, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Outside, a gardener's distant lawnmower hummed, a mundane soundtrack to an exchange that was anything but ordinary. I've researched every employee in this house, Victor said, moving toward the leather chair behind the massive oak desk, a position of authority he occupied instinctively. Your references checked out. The Petersons in Westport spoke highly of your work ethic. Before that, the Hendersons in Greenwich. His fingers drummed once on the polished wood. A perfectly crafted employment history. I never falsified any references, Elise replied calmly. No, Victor agreed. You didn't. That would have been easier to detect. He pulled a folder from the desk drawer and opened it, revealing what Elise recognized as her employment application from 3 years earlier. Your application was impeccable. Too impeccable looking back. No gaps in employment, no unexplained periods. He looked up at her. People with nothing to hide typically have messier histories. Elise remained standing, refusing the subtle power dynamic of sitting while he stood. Not everyone has the luxury of a messy history, Mr. Armand. Some of us need to be perfect just to survive. Victor studied her for a long moment. James ran a deeper background check last night. He slid a printed page across the desk toward her. Elizabeth Johnson, born in Bridgeport. Father, James Johnson, mechanical engineer. Mother, Diana Johnson, elementary school teacher. Full scholarship to MIT, mechanical engineering program. Dropped out after 2 years despite a perfect GPA. His voice softened slightly. Your father died suddenly, heart attack. Your mother developed multiple sclerosis soon after. You became her caregiver until her death 3 years ago. Elise's expression remained neutral despite the invasion of privacy. You've been thorough. What the report doesn't explain, Victor continued, is why a brilliant MIT engineering student with a perfect academic record ended up cleaning my house. His eyes narrowed. Or why Lawrence Bennett recognized you at the gala. Or why my father's name appears in your father's obituary, offering condolences despite no obvious connection between them. Your father and mine worked together, Elise said carefully. Armand Industries employed thousands. Victor countered. My father didn't personally mourn every employee who passed away. My father wasn't just any employee. Victor leaned forward. Then who was he? Elise took a deliberate breath. This moment, this conversation, was what she had been positioning herself for over 3 patient years. Yet now that it had arrived, she found herself hesitating, aware that once certain truths were spoken, they could never be recalled. James Johnson was lead engineer on the hybrid energy transfer system that became the cornerstone of Armand Industries' growth in the early 2000s, she said finally. The patent that made your father's company valuable enough to sell for billions. Recognition flickered in Victor's eyes. The hybrid energy transfer system was legendary within the company history. The innovation that had transformed Armand Industries from a regional manufacturer to a global technology leader. The patent that had ultimately made the company attractive enough for Malcolm Armand to sell at a premium, transitioning the family from wealthy industrialists to financial titans. That doesn't explain why you're here, Victor said, his voice measured. Elise reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a folded paper, a copy of the document she had shown Lawrence Bennett that morning. She placed it on the desk between them. This is a draft of the patent application for the hybrid energy transfer system, dated 3 months before the official filing. She met Victor's gaze. If you look at the inventor field, you'll see my father's name, not Malcolm Armand's. Victor's expression remained skeptical as he examined the document. A draft proves nothing. Ideas evolve, contributors change, which is why I have my father's original research notebooks, prototypes, and dated correspondence. demonstrating that he developed the system independently. Elise's voice remained steady, despite the emotion underlying her words. Your father stole my father's work, Mr. Arman, filed for the patent under his own name. And when my father confronted him with evidence, Malcolm Armand used his influence to ensure my father would never work in engineering again. Victor's face hardened. That's a serious accusation against a man who can no longer defend himself. It's the truth, Elise replied simply. A truth I've carried for 10 years while watching the Armand Foundation showcase your family's generosity with wealth built partially on stolen innovation. Victor stood, discomfort with the accusation manifesting as physical movement. He walked to the window, looking out over the manicured gardens. Even if what you say is true, and I'm not conceding that it is, why come here? Why spend 3 years cleaning my house instead of pursuing legal action? Elise allowed herself a small, sad smile. What do you think happens when the daughter of a disgraced engineer with no financial resources goes up against a billion-dollar family? The statute of limitations on patent infringement is 6 years. By the time I had buried both my parents and could even think about justice, the legal window had closed. So this is about revenge, Victor concluded, turning back to face her. No, Elise said firmly. This is about recognition. My father died believing his life's work had been stolen and his reputation destroyed. I wanted to understand if you were aware of what had happened, if the son knowingly benefited from the father's theft. The accusation hung in the air between them, impossible to dismiss yet difficult to accept. Victor's expression betrayed a complex interplay of emotions, defensiveness of his father's legacy, natural skepticism toward an accusation against his family, and something else, a flicker of uncertainty that suggested this wasn't entirely surprising. My father was many things, Victor said finally. Ruthless in business, certainly, demanding, uncompromising, but a thief? He shook his head. That doesn't align with the man I knew. The men we think we know can surprise us, Elise replied quietly, especially fathers. Victor returned to the desk, picking up the patent draft again. You broke into my study to find evidence supporting your claim, he said, making it a statement rather than a question. No, Elise said firmly. I didn't break into anything. Whatever was taken from your study, I had nothing to do with it. Their eyes locked in silent assessment, each weighing the other's truthfulness. After a long moment, Victor nodded slightly as though accepting her denial. For now. Why reveal all this to me today? He asked. After 3 years of silence. Why now? Because yesterday changed things, Elise admitted. When you mocked me in front of everyone, when you dangled those car keys like I was beneath consideration, it reminded me too much of how your father dismissed mine. And when I fixed the car, she paused. The look on your face told me you might be different from him after all, capable of surprise, of reassessment. Victor sat back in his chair, absorbing her words. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of history neither had fully understood until this moment. I want to see your evidence, he said finally. All of it. The notebooks, the prototypes, the correspondence. If what you're claiming is true, I need to verify it myself. I expected nothing less, Elise replied. But I won't bring them here. The materials stay secure with my attorney. Your attorney, Victor repeated, a new wariness entering his tone. So you are pursuing legal action. I'm protecting myself, Elise corrected, something my father failed to do. Victor studied her with newfound respect, or at least reassessment. The woman standing before him was far removed from the silent, efficient housekeeper who had moved invisibly through his home for 3 years. This Elizabeth Johnson was formidable, strategic, patient in a way that commanded attention. I assume your continued employment here is untenable, he said. That depends on you, Elise replied. I came here seeking understanding, not employment. Now that I've found it, or at least begun to, my purpose has been served. Victor leaned forward. And what exactly do you want now, Ms. Johnson? Money? Public acknowledgement? My father's name stripped from the patent posthumously? I want the truth acknowledged, she said simply. I want my father's work recognized, not erased or stolen or forgotten. Before Victor could respond, the library door opened and James entered, his usual composed demeanor slightly disheveled. Victor, He stopped short, registering the tension in the room and Elise's presence. I apologize for interrupting. I can come back. It's fine, Victor said, not taking his eyes off Elise. Ms. Johnson and I have concluded our discussion for now. He stood. You'll have my decision by tomorrow regarding your continued employment. Elise nodded, recognizing the dismissal, As she turned to leave, Victor added, "And Ms. Johnson, if you did access my study last night, I strongly suggest you return whatever was taken, immediately. As I said, Mr. Armand, I had nothing to do with that." She met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps you should consider who else might benefit from accessing your father's private records." With that, she left the library, closing the heavy door behind her. In the corridor, she paused, allowing herself a moment to process the magnitude of what had just transpired. 3 years of careful positioning, of patient waiting, had culminated in this confrontation, though not exactly as she had planned, and someone else had broken into Victor's study, someone with their own interest in Malcolm Armand's secrets. The coincidence seemed too convenient to be random. "Elise?" Daphne's concerned voice broke through her thoughts. The younger woman approached cautiously from the direction of the kitchen. "Are you all right? Everyone's talking about the break-in, and when Richardson said Mr. Armand wanted to see you." "I'm fine," Elise assured her, composing herself quickly. "Just a routine questioning. I was in my room all night." Daphne looked relieved. "Good." Mrs. Crawford was worried they might suspect staff members. She lowered her voice. "Though between us, I heard Mr. Whitaker telling Mr. Armand that the security footage showed someone using a key card with executive access, not staff credentials." Elise's interest sharpened. "Executive access?" "That's what they said. Only a few people have that level of clearance. Mr. Armand himself, Mr. Whitaker, Mrs. Crawford, and Mr. Richardson." Daphne shrugged. "Anyway, we're behind on the weekly linen rotation. Mrs. Crawford is on the warpath after all the excitement." "I'll be right there," Elise promised, her mind racing with this new information. Inside the library, Victor paced while James watched with growing concern. "She's lying," James said flatly. "Her sudden revelation about her father's connection to your father is too convenient, especially after the break-in." "Perhaps," Victor acknowledged. "But the patent draft looks authentic, and Lawrence Bennett did recognize her at the gala." "Bennett's memory isn't what it used to be," James countered. "And documents can be forged." Victor stopped pacing. "What did you find in the security logs? Who accessed my study last night?" James hesitated, discomfort evident in his posture. "That's what I came to tell you. The logs show your father's old access code was used, the one you kept active as a backup." "That's impossible," Victor said sharply. "Only you and I know that code." An uncomfortable silence fell between them, heavy with implication. They had been friends since college, had built their adult lives in parallel. James always the steady advisor behind Victor's more visible leadership. "Unless," Victor continued slowly, "someone found it in my private files, the same files that were accessed last night." James straightened his glasses, a nervous gesture Victor had observed countless times over their decades of friendship. "I've known you too long for baseless suspicion, Victor. Whatever Elizabeth Johnson may have told you, I think we should investigate her claims thoroughly before jumping to conclusions." "Agreed," Victor said, though his voice carried a new edge of caution. "Arrange a meeting with her and her attorney. I want to see all the evidence she claims to have." "And in the meantime?" James asked. "In the meantime," Victor replied, "I think we should both be careful about what we assume, about everyone." Later that evening, as sunset painted the Armand estate in golden hues, Elise sat on the small bench outside the staff quarters, her phone in hand. The text message to Caroline Martinez was brief. "Meeting to be arranged. Prepare all materials for review." The response came quickly. "Already done. Proceed with caution." Across the grounds, she could see lights on in Victor's private study, his silhouette visible as he worked late into the evening. What was he thinking now? Was he defending his father's legacy against her accusations, or beginning to question the foundation of his inherited empire? Elise's phone buzzed again. An unexpected text from an unknown number. "We should talk. Your father deserved better. I can help. L.B. Lawrence Bennett." How had he gotten her number? As she pondered this development, another figure caught her attention, James Whitaker, walking briskly from the main house toward his car in the guest parking area. Something about his hurried movements suggested urgency, anxiety. The pieces of a puzzle beyond her original understanding were shifting into new configurations. Her simple quest for recognition of her father's work had uncovered layers of complexity she hadn't anticipated. And somewhere within the massive Armand estate, secrets older and potentially darker than her father's stolen patent were stirring to the surface. Secrets someone had risked breaking into Victor's study to uncover or perhaps to conceal. Elise looked down at her phone again, at Lawrence Bennett's cryptic message. "Your father deserved better. I can help." What did he know that he hadn't shared this morning? And why reach out now after their conversation with this offer of help? The marble driveway that had been the setting for her humiliation and subsequent triumph yesterday now seemed like the threshold to a labyrinth she hadn't fully comprehended when she first crossed it 3 years ago, seeking justice for her father. As night fell completely over the Armand estate, Elise made a decision. She texted Bennett back. Tomorrow, 8 a.m., same place. Whatever came next would change everything. For her, for Victor, and for the legacy both their fathers had left behind. Monday morning arrived with a persistent drizzle that shrouded the Armand estate in a gray mist, blurring the sharp lines between wealth and the world beyond its gates. Elise had risen before dawn, sleep having proved elusive as her mind replayed yesterday's confrontation with Victor and the mysterious text from Lawrence Bennett. She dressed in civilian clothes again, dark slacks and a tailored blazer that belonged to her pre-Armand life, when professional ambitions had still seemed possible. The outfit was a conscious choice, armor of sorts for the day ahead. She had already placed her staff uniforms in a neat stack on her bed, uncertain if she would need them again. The estate was quiet as she slipped out through the service entrance at 6:45 a.m. Most of the household staff wouldn't arrive until 8, and Victor was known for never emerging from his private quarters before 9. Only Mrs. Crawford would be up, preparing the day's schedule in her office near the kitchen, far from Elise's exit route. The drive to Stamford felt shorter than it had the day before, urgency compressing time as the windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm against the rain. Lawrence Bennett was waiting on his covered porch when she arrived, 2 steaming mugs already prepared on the small table beside his chair. "You're earlier than I expected," he said as she hurried up the steps, shaking raindrops from her jacket. "I didn't want to risk being followed," Elise replied, accepting the offered coffee with grateful hands. The warmth seeped through her fingers, a small comfort against the morning chill. Lawrence nodded in understanding. "Wise precaution. After our conversation yesterday, I did some research of my own." He gestured toward the door. "Let's continue inside. What I have to show you isn't for potential prying eyes." In his modest living room, Lawrence had transformed the coffee table into an impromptu workstation. A laptop sat open beside several manila folders, their edges worn with age. A portable scanner hummed quietly on a side table. "You've been busy," Elise observed, taking a seat on the sofa. "I couldn't sleep after your visit," Lawrence admitted, lowering himself carefully into his armchair. "What you told me about your father's patent, it brought back memories. Questions I should have asked years ago." "What kind of questions?" Lawrence removed his glasses, polishing them absently with the edge of his sweater. When Malcolm Armand announced the hybrid energy transfer system, it came as a surprise to many of us in senior engineering. Your father had been working on energy efficiency projects, certainly, but the sudden leap in technology seemed improbable. "Because it wasn't his work," Elise said quietly. "Perhaps, but there was more." Lawrence replaced his glasses and opened one of the folders. "After our talk, I pulled out my old files from that period. Communication logs, meeting minutes, research allocation reports." He handed her a printed email. "This is from Malcolm to the board of directors, dated 3 months before the patent filing. He mentions a significant breakthrough in energy transfer technology coming from outside our usual R&D channels." Elise scanned the document, her heart quickening at the implications. Outside channels? Malcolm had connections throughout the industry, consultants, advisors, venture capital contacts. Lawrence leaned forward. "But here's where it gets interesting." He pulled out another document, a bank statement. "This is from Malcolm's discretionary corporate account, which I had access to as chief engineer for approving technical acquisitions. 2 weeks before that email, he authorized a payment of $750,000 to a shell company called Trans-Tech Innovations." "I've never heard of them," Elise said, studying the statement. "Because they didn't exist except on paper," Lawrence replied. "I checked state registrations last night. The company was formed 1 month before that payment and dissolved 6 months after." Elise's mind raced with implications. "You think my father's innovation was purchased rather than simply stolen?" "Not from your father directly," Lawrence clarified. "If James had sold his invention, he would have had the funds to keep you in school after Malcolm laid everyone off. No, I suspect Malcolm acquired the technology through less reputable channels, perhaps from someone who had access to your father's work." "Industrial espionage," Elise whispered. "It wouldn't be unheard of," Lawrence said grimly. "The energy sector was cutthroat then, with billions at stake in emerging technologies. Your father kept meticulous research notes, but did he ever mention working with outside partners? Or unusual interest in his projects from colleagues? Elise tried to recall conversations from a decade earlier, memories dulled by grief and time. There was someone, a researcher from Germany who visited our house once. My father seemed excited about potential collaboration. She shook her head. I was focused on my own studies then. I didn't pay enough attention. Werner Kreisler, Lawrence said with such certainty that Elise looked up in surprise. Brilliant mind, ethically flexible. He consulted for several companies simultaneously, including Armand Industries for a brief period. Your father mentioned him in some of his project updates. You think this Kreisler could have taken my father's research to Malcolm? It's a theory, Lawrence conceded, but what matters now is what we can prove. He turned to his laptop, opening a document that Elise immediately recognized as the official patent for the hybrid energy transfer system. The original filing lists Malcolm Armand as sole inventor, but patent applications go through revisions. I accessed the Patent Office database last night. He scrolled to the last page, highlighting a section labeled Amendments and Corrections. 3 weeks after the initial filing, Lawrence continued, Malcolm submitted a correction that added a technical consultant acknowledgement. He zoomed in on the text, where a single name appeared in small print, J. Johnson. Elise's breath caught. My father. A minimal acknowledgement buried in the final documentation where few would notice, Lawrence confirmed. Not inventor status, not even co-inventor, just a consultant acknowledgement. But it proves your father's involvement, and more importantly, it proves Malcolm knew it. Why would he add even that much if he was stealing the work? Elise asked, confusion mixing with vindication. Insurance, Lawrence suggested. If your father ever pursued legal action, Malcolm could point to the acknowledgement as evidence he hadn't completely erased James's contribution. It would muddy the waters enough to make litigation difficult. Calculated, Elise murmured. Malcolm always was. Lawrence closed the laptop. But here's what you need to know, Elizabeth. I've scanned all these documents and stored them securely online. If anything happens to me, why would anything happen to you? Elise interrupted, alarmed by the implication. Lawrence's expression grew somber. Because I sent Victor an email last night requesting a private meeting to discuss historical discrepancies in patent filings. I didn't mention you or your father specifically, but given your confrontation with him yesterday, he'll make the connection, Elise finished. Why would you do that? Put yourself at risk? Because I'm old, Lawrence said simply. My career is long behind me. I have no family dependent on me, no reputation that can be meaningfully damaged at this point. His eyes, behind wire-framed glasses, held a determination that belied his age. And because I owe it to James, I should have asked these questions 10 years ago when he was still alive. Elise felt a surge of gratitude mixed with concern. What did Victor say? He agreed to meet this afternoon at 2. Lawrence handed her a memory stick. This contains everything I've found, plus some material you might not have. Internal communications, meeting minutes where your father's projects were discussed, the original research allocation budgets. Elise pocketed the memory stick, its small weight suddenly feeling monumentally important. Thank you, she said, meaning it deeply. Don't thank me yet, Lawrence cautioned. Victor isn't Malcolm, but he protects the Armand legacy fiercely. He won't admit to any wrongdoing easily, even if he wasn't personally responsible. I know, Elise replied, but now we have leverage. As she prepared to leave, Lawrence walked her to the door, his movements betraying his age more visibly than the day before. The morning's exertions seemed to have tired him. Be careful, Elizabeth, he said, clasping her hand. Your father was a good man who deserved better than what happened to him. Make this right, but don't destroy yourself in the process. I won't, she promised. The rain had intensified as Elise drove back toward the Armand estate, her windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. The memory stick in her pocket felt like it contained not just data, but a decade of her life. The opportunities lost, the dreams deferred, the quiet dignity her father had maintained even as his life's work was stolen from him. She was so absorbed in thought that she almost missed the black SUV parked across from the estate's main entrance. Its windows were tinted, but as she drove past, she caught a glimpse of the driver, James Whitaker, Victor's CFO and confidant, apparently waiting and watching who entered or left the property. Instead of turning into the staff entrance, Elise continued past, making a split-second decision. She pulled into a small coffee shop half a mile down the road and called Caroline Martinez. "I need to see you immediately," she said when the lawyer answered. "I have new information that changes everything." 45 minutes later, Elise sat in Caroline's sleek downtown office laying out the documents Lawrence had provided alongside her own evidence. "This acknowledgement in the patent filing is significant," Caroline said, studying the highlighted text. "It establishes that Malcolm Armand knew of your father's contribution at minimum. Combined with your father's original notebooks and the prototype documentation, we have a much stronger case than I initially thought." "Strong enough to go public?" Elise asked. Caroline considered this carefully. "Public opinion would likely favor your narrative. The brilliant black engineer whose innovation was appropriated by a wealthy white businessman is compelling in today's climate. But legally, the statute of limitations remains an issue for patent infringement." "What about fraud?" Elise suggested, "or unjust enrichment? The Armand Foundation uses the prestige of that innovation to fundraise even today." "Potentially," Caroline conceded. "We could argue that the fraud is ongoing through continued misrepresentation of the innovation's origins." She tapped her pen thoughtfully against the desk. "But litigation would be expensive and protracted. The Armand legal team would bury us in motions and delays." "I don't necessarily want a lawsuit," Elise clarified. "I want recognition for my father's work. I want the truth acknowledged. And maybe what?" Elise hesitated, an idea forming that she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. "Maybe a more fitting memorial than just his name on a patent. Something that honors what he could have achieved if given the chance." "A foundation?" Caroline suggested. "A scholarship fund?" "Something like that," Elise agreed. "Funded by the fortune built on his innovation." Caroline's expression turned cautious. "That would require Victor Armand's voluntary cooperation. From what you've told me, I wouldn't count on his generosity." "Not generosity," Elise corrected. "Self-interest. Victor cares about the Armand legacy more than anything. If going public with this story would damage that legacy more than a private settlement would." "You're suggesting leverage, not litigation," Caroline observed, professional admiration in her tone. "Clever, but risky. If he calls your bluff—" "It won't be a bluff," Elise interrupted. "I'm prepared to go public if necessary, but I'd rather resolve this without destroying what my father helped build, even unknowingly." The lawyer studied her with newfound respect. "You've thought this through more thoroughly than most clients I've had. But there's still the question of Victor's reaction. Men with that much wealth and power don't respond well to what they perceive as threats." "I know," Elise said quietly. "But I also know more about Victor Armand than most people. I've observed him closely for 3 years. His public image matters to him. The Foundation's reputation is essential to his business relationships. And beneath the arrogance, I believe there's a sense of justice. Warped perhaps by privilege, but present." "A risky assessment to bet your case on," Caroline warned. "It's not a bet," Elise replied with quiet confidence. "It's a calculated move in a game I've been playing patiently for years." As Elise left the law office, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the city streets gleaming in watery sunshine. She checked her watch, 11:30 a.m. In 2.5 hours, Lawrence Bennett would meet with Victor, potentially setting in motion events that couldn't be reversed. She needed to return to the estate, to be present when that meeting concluded. But first, she had one more stop to make. The downtown branch of Connecticut National Bank was bustling with midday activity when Elise entered, her step purposeful as she approached the personal banking desk. "I need to access my safe deposit box," she told the representative, presenting her ID and key. 20 minutes later, she exited the bank, her father's original research notebook secure in her bag alongside the memory stick Lawrence had given her. The combined evidence now felt complete, a chain of proof linking her father's innovation to Malcolm Armand's theft and the fortune subsequently built on that foundation. As Elise drove back toward the Armand estate, her phone rang. The display showed an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Miss Johnson." Victor Armand's voice was instantly recognizable, its cultured tones carrying a new note of tension. "I believe we need to continue our conversation from yesterday immediately." Elise's pulse quickened. "I'm not currently at the estate, Mr. Armand." "I'm aware," he replied, the implication clear. He had been monitoring her movements. "My security team noted your departure this morning. I'm calling to inform you that your access credentials have been temporarily suspended pending our discussion." "That seems unnecessary," Elise replied evenly. "Perhaps," Victor conceded, "but given the sensitive nature of what you've alleged against my father, and the concerning coincidence of a break-in the same weekend you chose to reveal these allegations, I think caution is warranted." Where would you like to meet? Elise asked, cutting through the pretense. A brief pause suggested her directness had caught him off guard. There's a private dining room at the Greenwich Country Club. I've reserved it for noon. I assume you know the address. I've cleaned enough of your tuxedos headed there, Elise replied, allowing a hint of irony to color her tone. Another pause. Yes, well, I'll see you there shortly. He ended the call abruptly. Elise adjusted her route, turning toward Greenwich instead of the estate. The unexpected invitation to neutral territory was telling. Victor was off balance, uncertain enough to prefer a public venue over his home ground. Lawrence's email requesting a meeting about the patents had clearly rattled him. The game was accelerating faster than she had anticipated, but as she navigated the winding roads toward Greenwich, Elise felt a strange calm settle over her. After 10 years of carrying her father's stolen legacy, after 3 years of invisible service in the house built on that theft, the moment of reckoning was finally at hand. In her rearview mirror, the black SUV she had spotted earlier appeared again, maintaining a discreet distance. James Whitaker was following her, undoubtedly on Victor's orders. Elise allowed herself a small smile. Let them think they were the ones in control of this situation. The truth, like her father's brilliant innovation, had a power all its own. Once released, it couldn't be contained by even the wealthiest hands. The Greenwich Country Club appeared ahead, its manicured grounds and colonial architecture a monument to old money and established power. As Elise parked her modest Honda among the luxury vehicles in the lot, she touched the notebook in her bag for reassurance. I'm doing this for you, Dad, she whispered to herself, drawing strength from the memory of the man who had taught her both engineering and dignity. For us, the Greenwich Country Club's private dining room was a study in understated opulence, dark wood paneling, oil paintings of New England landscapes, and windows overlooking the immaculate golf course. Victor Armand stood when Elise entered, his usual confident demeanor undercut by the tension evident in his posture. Ms. Johnson, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him at the small table. A silver tea service sat between them, untouched. Thank you for coming. Your invitation didn't sound optional, Elise replied, taking the seat but declining to reach for the tea. She placed her bag on the chair beside her, the weight of her father's notebook a reassuring presence. I received an interesting email last night, Victor began without preamble. From Lawrence Bennett. He wishes to discuss, and I quote, historical discrepancies in patent filings this afternoon, his eyes fixed on hers. A remarkable coincidence given our conversation yesterday. Not a coincidence, Elise acknowledged. I visited Lawrence yesterday morning. Victor's eyebrows rose slightly, surprise at her candor momentarily displacing his practiced composure. I see. And did you share your theories about my father with him? I didn't need to, Elise replied. Lawrence already had questions of his own. He was chief engineer when the hybrid energy transfer system was patented. He knew my father's work intimately, and yet he said nothing for a decade, Victor countered. Many people remain silent when confronting powerful interests, Elise said quietly. It doesn't make the truth less true. Victor studied her with newfound intensity. Gone was the dismissive employer who had tossed her car keys in mockery. This, Victor Armand was calculating, reassessing, perhaps even uncertain. I've spent the morning reviewing all available documentation on that patent, he said finally, including the amendment my father filed acknowledging your father as a technical consultant. Elise nodded, a minimal acknowledgement buried where few would notice it. But an acknowledgement nonetheless, Victor replied, which contradicts your claim that my father stole your father's work outright. Technical consultant versus sole inventor, Elise said, leaning forward slightly. The difference represents billions in wealth that built your current life, Mr. Armand. Wealth that should have secured my father's future, my education, my mother's medical care. A muscle worked in Victor's jaw as he absorbed her words. What exactly do you want, Ms. Johnson? Money? I want justice, Elise replied simply. Recognition of my father's contribution, not as a footnote, but as the primary innovator he was. And yes, appropriate compensation for what was taken. You have no legal standing, Victor said, though his tone lacked conviction. The statute of limitations. This isn't about legal standing, Elise interrupted. It's about the truth. A truth I'm prepared to make public, with Lawrence Bennett's support and my father's original documentation. She patted her bag meaningfully. The Armand Foundation's reputation is built on your family's perceived generosity and innovation. How would your donors react to learning the fortune behind it came partially from appropriated work? How would the underprivileged youth you claim to support feel about the black engineer whose brilliance was erased? Victor's expression hardened. That sounds remarkably like blackmail. It's an opportunity, Elise corrected, to right a historical wrong, to demonstrate that you're not your father, that you understand justice requires more than charity, given from wealth unjustly acquired. Silence fell between them, heavy with implications. Outside, the manicured golf course gleamed in the midday sun, a world apart from the modest neighborhood where Elise had grown up, where her father had worked on innovations at their kitchen table long into the night. "You've been planning this for 3 years," Victor said finally, realization dawning in his eyes. "Since the moment you applied to work in my house. I needed to understand who you were," Elise acknowledged. "Whether you knew about the theft, whether you were complicit or simply ignorant. And your conclusion? That you're arrogant, privileged, and often blind to the humanity of those who serve you," Elise said candidly, "but not dishonest, not deliberately cruel like your father was to mine." Victor flinched slightly at the assessment. "You presume to know me after cleaning my house?" "I know you better than most," Elise replied. "The powerful reveal themselves most clearly to those they believe are invisible." Another silence stretched between them, but the quality had shifted. The tension remained, but something else had entered the space. A reluctant mutual respect, perhaps, or at least recognition of the other's intelligence and resolve. "What would this justice look like in practical terms?" Victor finally asked. Elise had prepared for this question, had rehearsed the answer through countless sleepless nights. Public recognition of James Johnson as the primary inventor of the hybrid energy transfer system. A scholarship foundation in his name for black students in engineering, funded by the Armand Foundation. And appropriate financial compensation for his family, me, reflecting the value his innovation created. And in return, I don't pursue litigation or go public with the full documentation of your father's actions, Elise said simply. The Armand name remains associated with recognizing brilliance rather than appropriating it. Your foundation's work continues, enhanced rather than tarnished. Victor stood abruptly, walking to the window. His reflection showed a man in conflict, pride warring with pragmatism, inherited certainty crumbling under new evidence. "I'll need to verify your father's notebooks independently," he said finally. "Have experts authenticate them." "Of course," Elise agreed. He turned back to face her. "And this settlement would remain confidential." "The recognition of my father wouldn't be confidential," Elise clarified. "That's non-negotiable. But the circumstances that led to this correction could be presented as a recent discovery, rather than a decades-old wrong." Victor nodded slowly, his business mind clearly calculating costs versus benefits, reputation damage versus financial outlay. "I need time to consider this." "Lawrence Bennett meets with you at 2, Elise reminded him. "I suspect his independent research will make your decision clearer." As they prepared to leave, Victor paused, a question clearly troubling him. "The break-in at my study. If not you, then who? Perhaps someone with more to lose than I do if the truth about your father's business practices comes to light," Elise suggested. "Someone who knew where to look for evidence that might be damaging beyond just the patent issue." Understanding dawned in Victor's eyes. "James, I wouldn't presume to accuse your CFO," Elise said carefully, "but power and wealth often attract those with their own agendas." In the parking lot, as they prepared to part ways, Victor stopped beside Elise's modest Honda. From his pocket, he withdrew something that glinted in the sunlight, the key fob to the Mercedes. "You made it run," he said, holding it out to her. "As I recall, we had a deal." Elise looked at the key in genuine surprise. "That wasn't a serious offer." "Perhaps it should have been," Victor replied. "Perhaps I should start keeping my word, even when I think no one of consequence is listening." He placed the key in her palm, closing her fingers around it. "Consider it a down payment on justice." As Elise drove away from the Greenwich Country Club, in her Honda, the Mercedes key secure in her pocket, she felt a weight lifting that had been her constant companion for a decade. The road ahead remained uncertain, negotiations complex, the full accounting of her father's legacy still to be determined. But for the first time since that cruel day when Malcolm Armand had destroyed her father's career and future, justice seemed possible. Not perfect justice. That would have required her father living to see his work recognized. Her mother receiving the care wealth could have provided. Elise herself completing the education that had been her birthright, but justice nonetheless, recognition, restoration, however delayed. In her rearview mirror, she could see Victor standing in the country club parking lot, watching her departure with an expression that suggested his own reckoning had only just begun. The marble driveway of the Armand estate would never look the same to either of them again.